You know that feeling when you swear you can almost perfectly recall a conversation you had?
Oh, definitely.
Or maybe you've even planned out a future conversation in your head, thinking, okay, I know exactly how this is going to go.
Right.
Well, prepare for a fascinating challenge to that whole idea.
Because what we're exploring today is this question. Can any human conversation truly be repeated, like down to the last little nuance?
It seems like it should be possible, right? On the surface, anyway.
Yeah, but there's this compelling new paper from DeepSeek and ceneezer that kind of throws a serious wrench in that idea.
Exactly. They've developed this groundbreaking framework. It's called the Temporal-Combinatorial model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, abstract theory. This model uses some serious math. It looks at social dynamics and even touches on complexity theory.
It's quite interdisciplinary.
It really is. So our goal in this deep dive is to unpack this model and really understand why the idea of repeating a conversation is, well, statistically speaking, just mind-blowingly unlikely.
Oh.
Okay, let's get right into it. Why does our gut maybe tell us we could repeat a conversation, but this paper argues it's essentially impossible?
Well, I think at its heart, it's because conversations aren't, fixed things. They're incredibly dynamic events.
Right.
They're deeply rooted in a specific context. Just think about it. The precise words chosen, the way they're said, all the subtle nonverbal cues.
Yeah, the tone, the pauses.
Exactly. And the ever-evolving mental states of everyone involved. So what DeepSeek and ceneezer have done is taken this sort of intuitive sense of fluidity and formalized it, put it into a rigorous mathematical model.
And this model, the Temporal-Combinatorial model, or TCM,
Yeah.
it looks at more than just the dictionary definitions of words, doesn't it? It's about a whole web of interacting factors.
That's right.
Can you maybe walk us through the key pieces of this framework?
Certainly. So the TCM basically rests on three fundamental components. The first one is combinatorial complexity. They represent it with the Greek letter omega. Now, think of this as simply the sheer number of different conversations that could potentially happen.
Wait, so we're talking about all the possible ways we can put sentences together and, express ourselves.
Precisely, but it actually goes beyond just the grammar. The model takes into account lexical choices, so the specific vocabulary we select,
Right.
and syntactic choices, how we structure those words into phrases and sentences. But even more subtly, it includes those nonverbal cues, what are sometimes called paralinguistics.
Like tone of voice, pacing.
Exactly, tone, the speed at which we speak, even the pauses we take. Little things. And to get a handle on this mathematically, they use the formula, omega kn.
All right, let's break that down a bit. What do the N and K stand for in that equation?
So n represents the number of individual elements within a conversation. This could be each word spoken, but also, like you said, those brief silences, those changes in tone, those tiny nonverbal signals.
Got it. Little units of meaning, almost.
Right. Kind of, yeah. And K represents the number of possible starts for each one of those individual elements.
Okay, so if we're just thinking about the words themselves, K would be roughly the size of our vocabulary. The paper mentions something like 105 words for a well-educated adult.
Exactly right. And even in a relatively short interaction, say involving just 100 of these elements, words, pauses, whatever, if K is that massive vocabulary.
Yeah.
The resulting omega becomes just astronomically huge, far, far exceeding.
Right.
To put that in perspective, that number is vastly larger than, say, the estimated number of atoms in the entire observable universe.
That's hard to even comprehend.
It is. So the key takeaway here is just the sheer scale. The astronomical number of potential conversations makes exact repetition a statistical long shot, really, even before we start thinking about time.
Wow, okay. So just the sheer number of possibilities makes it seem like winning some kind of cosmic lottery multiple times in a row.
Okay.
But the model goes further, right? It factors in the passage of time itself.
Absolutely. That's where the second component comes in, the temporal decay function.
Okay.
The paper posits that even if, against all odds, the exact same words and nonverbal cues were somehow replicated.
Which we just established is incredibly unlikely.
Right. Even if that happened, the mere fact that time has passed and the participants themselves have changed makes true repetition impossible. They express this idea with a probability formula.
Okay, so we see that massive omega again in the denominator, the 1 omega, hammering home that initial improbability. But what's the role of that second part, the E bit.
So that's the factor that accounts for decay over time. Represents the probability of an identical conversation happening again after a certain amount of time has passed.
Right.
And the crucial element here is this decay constant. They actually break it down into two really insightful components, lambda and gamma.
Okay, lambda and gamma. So what do those represent in this context of, conversational uniqueness over time?
So lambda represents the rate of external changes. Think environmental shifts, cultural shifts.
Like the news cycle, what's happening in the world.
Exactly. Social norms evolve, new slang pops up. Even if you tried to recreate a chat from last week, the world around you has shifted. Subtly or maybe not so subtly.
Makes sense.
And gamma.
Gamma, on the other hand, represents the rate of internal cognitive decay. Basically, how much the individuals in the conversation change over time.
Ah, so our own memories, experiences, moods.
Precisely. And interestingly, the paper suggests that this internal cognitive decay is proportional to the logarithm of time. So gamma propto NT.
Meaning that the longer it's been since the original conversation, the more we've changed internally. Is that the idea?
That's the core idea, yes.
Yeah.
We have new experiences, we learn things, our perspectives might shift. And the paper presents a truly striking figure based on this.
They estimate that even using quite conservative values for these decay rates, the probability of an identical 100-word conversation happening again within just 1 week
1 week.
drops to around 1031.
10 to the minus 131.
Yep. They even include a figure 1 in their paper showing this incredibly rapid drop-off.
That's practically zero. It's incomprehensibly small.
Pretty much. It really shows that even if the words were somehow the same, the changing context and, crucially, the changing participants make true repetition across time vanishingly unlikely.
So even if you meticulously try to reenact a chat from a few days ago, the model says it's basically a statistical impossibility. And we still have the third piece of the puzzle, feedback-driven irreversibility.
Right.
That sounds like the very act of having a conversation changes the participants, which then prevents future identical conversations.
Exactly right. The third key aspect is how each conversation we have actually alters us, making any future identical repetitions even less probable.
How does that work in the model?
They introduce an update rule for that internal cognitive decay rate we just talked about, specifically the gamma for the next conversation, let's call it gamma plus 1, is equal to the current plus this factor they call delta.
Okay, delta. And what does delta represent here? What's the significance of adding that factor?
So delta represents the conversational impact. It's basically the effect that the conversation itself has on the people involved.
Like, did you learn something new? Or have an emotional shift?
Exactly, even a subtle one. Even seemingly minor interactions can contribute a small positive value to delta. And the critical point is that with repeated interactions, these delta values accumulate.
Ah, so they add up over time.
They add up, leading to a faster and faster rate of decay and the probability of having identical conversations. They give an example where a delta of just 0 to 0.01.
Which sounds tiny.
It does, but it could increase that overall decay constant by 10% with each subsequent conversation. So the very act of talking changes us, further cementing the uniqueness of each exchange.
So the more you interact with someone, the more your internal states diverge, making it progressively harder and harder to recreate any past conversation. It's like each chat leaves this unique imprint on your mind.
That's a great way to put it.
It's just fascinating how this model tries to quantify something that feels so, well, intuitively true. And the paper also touches on some real-world examples, doesn't it? Like in forensic linguistics.
Yes, yeah. They point out that in forensic linguistics, where experts analyze recordings and transcripts for legal cases, there are basically no documented instances of truly identical conversations ever being found.
Which fits perfectly.
It aligns very well with the model's predictions, yeah. This real-world observation kind of backs it up.
That makes perfect sense. Every conversation is just so shaped by its specific context and the individuals, even if the topic seems similar on the surface. What about the comparison to AI chatbots? They can reproduce text outputs pretty easily, can't they? How does the model address that?
Yeah, that's a really crucial distinction the paper highlights. While AI chatbots can certainly be programmed to generate similar or even identical text responses to the same prompts,
Right.
they fundamentally lack that inherent temporal decay, especially the part driven by the internal cognitive change.
Ah, they don't change their minds or learn in the same way over time.
Exactly. They don't possess internal cognitive states that are constantly evolving in that same complex, somewhat unpredictable way that human minds do. And this really underscores one of the major challenges in developing truly human-like AI dialogue systems.
So even if a bot could technically spit out the same sequence of words, it wouldn't really be the same as a human conversation because that crucial element of internal change, the gamma decay, is missing.
Precisely. It lacks that temporal depth, that history embedded within the participants.
It sounds like this model has some pretty significant implications then, stretching beyond just, understanding our everyday chats.
Oh, absolutely. For AI, as we just discussed, it really emphasizes the profound complexity of achieving genuine, human-like interaction. It's not just about spitting out grammatically correct sentences.
Right.
In forensic science, it reinforces the idea that conversational evidence can be considered highly unique, almost like a fingerprint in some ways.
Interesting parallel.
And then on a broader societal level, it provides a formal sort of mathematical basis for our intuitive understanding that time is irreversible, particularly when it comes to social interactions. Each conversation is really a singular event in time that can never be precisely replicated.
This all sounds incredibly convincing. Did the paper also give some insight into how they arrived at these conclusions? Like, what kind of methods did they use to actually build and support this model?
Yeah, they did touch on that, although the technical details can get quite involved. They mention using combinatorial analysis and drawing on concepts like Shannon entropy.
Which is about information and uncertainty.
Exactly. It helps quantify the sheer number of possibilities in language, showing just how vast the conversational space is. They also talk about fitting that decay constant to existing research on how relationships and individual psychological states tend to change over time.
So grounding it in other empirical work.
Right. And they even conducted Monte Carlo simulations computer modeling, essentially, although they note it was on a smaller scale, like with elements, just to observe how the model behaves under different conditions.
So a mix of theoretical math connecting to existing data and simulation.
Yeah, these diverse methodological approaches definitely add significant weight to their findings.
So just to kind of wrap it up then, this temporal-combinatorial model presents a really compelling case, backed by some serious mathematical and conceptual thinking, for why hitting replay on a human conversation is, well, statistically impossible. It's that combination, isn't it? The staggering complexity of language and all its nuances, plus the constantly shifting internal and external worlds we live in.
Exactly. Those two forces working together make each interaction truly unique and fundamentally unrepeatable. It's not just about the words, but the entire dynamic, evolving system.
This really gives you some food for thought about our everyday interactions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, knowing that each one is this fleeting, never to be exactly reproduced moment.
It does.
Does this understanding of conversational uniqueness change how you think about your own conversations? Does it maybe, I don't know, highlight the value inherent in each unique exchange a bit more?
That's a really profound question to sit with, actually. If no conversation can ever be truly repeated, well, what does that tell us about the fundamental nature of human connection itself?
Yeah.
Or about how we learn and grow through talking to each other, and just about the relentless flow of time itself? It certainly offers a fresh perspective on the simple act of talking.